The interesting argument about a whale is that if its origins were land-based originally, then we have some crude way of assessing quantitatively the scope of the project of transformation.
Can do. Whales evolved from Pakicetus, a land mammal about the size of a wolf. From there, still on land, they became Indohyus, and from there moved to the water to become Koochicetus, Protocetus, Rhodocetus, and many others. Not only did their limbs gradually get more flipper-like, their eyes receded back to the sides of their heads, allowing the nostrils to move slowly upward to eventually become the blowhole. By the time Squalodon came along, they had a rudimentary echolocation and could now evolve into modern whales. That's the Cliff Notes version. The real story is much more complex and covers a lot more transitional forms, but you can get the idea. His demand is no problem for science.
You've got a cow. You want to teach it how to live all of its life in the open ocean, still retaining its air-breathing characteristics. What do you have to do from an engineering point of view to change the cow into a whale?
Oh, how wrong art thee! Let me count the ways. First of all, you do not evolve an individual. An individual cow never becomes anything but a cow. Creationists often say this to refute their strawman version of evolution, but it's not how real evolution works. Second, you don't teach the cow how to do it. It has nothing whatsoever to do with learned behavior. Third, you don't go from living all its life on land to living all its life on the ocean. Ambulocetus was amphibious, with its back legs adapted for swimming and its front legs for land use. Probably it lived in shallow waters and caught its prey the way crocodiles do. Really, the way this would work is that you would make the cow have a whole lot of babies and put them in shallow water. The ones that could live could pass their genes on to the next generation. Gradually, you adapt the environment to require them to spend more and more time in the water, and over the generations, they get better adapted to this environment. You need to do this slowly over a long period of time. Whales took 40 million years to adapt to the water.
Since we know that life on Earth and life in the water are fundamentally different enterprises, we have some sense of the number of changes.
Not so. We've already seen how the blowhole evolved gradually from nostrils. Let's now look at the flipper. Structurally and functionally, the flipper at first glance looks entirely different from a mammalian limb. But let's take a look inside at the bones. Can you tell which of these is from the flipper of a whale and which is the hand of an ape? They look so similar that, unless you're an expert, telling the difference can be difficult. It's hard to imagine any transition to a water mammal any more drastic than a hand to a flipper, but the morphology clearly shows that incremental steps are all that are needed to make it happen. Oh, and in case you're wondering, the bones of a fish's fin are completely different.
Here's a chance actually to put some numbers on calculations. We're not talking about genetics, we're talking about simple numbers.
Right, because if you had to deal with genetics, you wouldn't have an argument.
The calculations are certainly not hard. But they're interesting because I stopped at 50,000. That is morphological changes.
Only 50,000? Over 40 million years? No problem. That's only one tiny change every 800 years. Easy for evolution. Is that all you got?
If Darwinian hypotheses are correct, it should suggest an enormous plethora of animals, intermediary between, say, Ambulocetus and the next step.
But what do you mean by the next step? If the changes are gradual, how do you put in steps? Rhodocetus wasn't that different from Ambulocetus, and yet they're separated by 4 million years. Is that a step? What about a fossil in between? Or do you have to wait until Basilosaurus isis, 3 million years after that, when they lost their ability to walk on their hind legs? Without defining precisely what you mean by a step, your question is specious.
But at least it will put it in the ballpark of a quantitative estimate, which is hardly ever done.
Because it isn't necessary. Such calculations are pointless, given the plethora of information we have in both the fossil record and the genetic record for the evolution of cetaceans from land mammals.